An absolutely massive explosion rocks Beirut. What caused it? We'll talk about that on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, Chuck Holton here. By now you've probably seen the footage of this absolutely horrific explosion that just took place in Beirut, Lebanon. Now, there were actually two explosions. The first one, which I haven't seen any video of, left a warehouse down near the port in Beirut, smoldering and on fire. Not long, about 15 minutes later, after lots of emergency personnel and lots of people, onlookers, had gone to the site of that first explosion, a second explosion took place that absolutely devastated most of downtown Lebanon. I've really never seen anything like that outside of a nuclear blast. And in fact, some people wondered whether or not it was some sort of low-order nuclear device when it happened. Now, there are lots of rumors floating around, and the death toll is climbing rapidly now. As it stands, as I record this, the death toll is somewhere around 100. But with this kind of event, it's so chaotic down there, and the hospitals are so overwhelmed that most likely there will be a death toll in the thousands by the time this is over. Definitely thousands of injuries. Maybe tens of thousands of injuries. That's a very densely populated area. I've been there a couple times, and I can tell you that place is an absolute clown show of political unrest, free-floating anger, occasional violence, and this goes all the way back to the Civil War that happened there in the 80s and 90s. If you're as old as I am, you probably remember the look of the streets of Beirut during that Civil War and the Green Line and all that. Well, Beirut looks like that again. But this all happened in just an instant. When windows were blown out, the explosion, there are so many videos coming out of this explosion and every one of them is just mind-boggling. You see buildings actually just evaporating, just being vaporized, cars being tossed about like toys. People flying through the air. It's amazing. Some of the video I've seen is too graphic to even show you, but the bottom line is Lebanon needs help. They were already in a really bad way from an economic standpoint because of the COVID virus. There's been a lot of protests there over the last couple of months, and there's some political things going on and tensions rising with Israel. And so that's going to come into our discussion about what might have caused this. Now, like I said, there are lots of rumors floating around. And so let's go through what some of them are. First of all, some of the first reports out of Lebanon are that there was a bunch of fireworks being stored in a warehouse down there at the port that caught fire and blew up. And in fact, you can see fireworks going off in some of those videos. So that actually sounds, fairly credible. However, that second explosion, what could have caused it? Because it's far more powerful than anything fireworks could have accomplished. Well, some people say because there were some large silos of grain next to the building with the fireworks in it, that the dust from the grain caught fire. And everybody knows probably that those kinds of events can cause large explosions, but not like what we've seen here. I don't go with the grain theory. If you look closely at some of the video coming out of there, the second explosion happened right underneath the building where the fireworks were being, it came right out of the ground right there. Did not come from the silos where the grain was being held. And in fact, the silos are still standing. And if it had come out of those silos, they probably would not be. Okay, now let's go on to some of the wilder rumors that are happening. We know that there have been some escalating tensions between Israel and Hezbollah, which is the sort of controlling political party in Lebanon right now. Hezbollah being Muslim terrorist organization without equal, highly subsidized by Iran, and who has been very active in attacking Israel over the years. As a matter of fact, Hezbollah operatives were just killed a few days ago in Syria as they were trying to attack from Syria into Israel and plant explosives in Israel. Now, Hezbollah had just been threatening that they were going to heavily retaliate against Israel for killing their Hezbollah operatives. And in fact, this article just came out about 12 hours before the explosion, where Israel was threatening them back. And this article, boy, the timing of this article, threatening major action against Hezbollah, does not look good for Israel. Now, Israel, for their part, has denied that this explosion, that they had anything to do with it. Hezbollah themselves have denied that Israel had anything to do with this explosion. But there are reports that Hezbollah operatives were quickly running into the area there right before that second explosion took place. And there are some other sort of events that make you go, not so sure about this. And so, look, much more remains to be seen. So I don't want to comment too much on this, but I think the most credible answer right now, the most credible theory about what caused this explosion, is that the customs in Beirut, the customs down there at the port, said that they had been storing since 2014 a large amount of ammonium nitrate right there at the port near where those fireworks were. Not a real good idea. Ammonium nitrate, as you know, is highly explosive and highly unstable, and could potentially cause an explosion like that. So I'm going to go with that theory for now, but we've got a lot more information that will come out in the days ahead, and so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I want to show you a Frontlines episode that I did about my last trip to Beirut that talks a lot about Hezbollah and the problems there. Check this out.
Chuck, you literally just got off the airplane.
We did. That's a long flight. We're looking forward to a good meal here.
Give us a sense for what Beirut is like today.
There were a lot of things that surprised me. One of them was that Hezbollah pretty much owns the whole southern part of Beirut, including the airport. And so when it came to trying to get photos of the site where the blast happened, we had to literally go ask permission from Hezbollah to get into the site. It was a little tense there for a while, and we had to work to get the story, but everything worked out in the end.
You've got the shot.
We did.
Hezbollah is a proxy for Iran. They're the ones who are running most of Lebanon today.
That's right, and they were back then, too. The bombing of the Marine barracks was a direct attack by Iran in Beirut on the United States, using Hezbollah as their actor. And the dynamics haven't changed even today. And, we learned a lot about terrorism from that event. And I'd like to ask you, because you have a lot of experience in Beirut. You spent a lot of time over there in the 80s. How has it changed our perception, or the U.S. government's, the way that they deal with terrorism?
Well, it's hard to describe any parallels between the current administration and what was going on back in the 80s, because quite frankly, this administration denies the whole approach of radical Islam. Mm-hmm. We missed that. When I was the U.S. government's counterterrorism coordinator, we could put a wire diagram of any terror organization in the world, whether it's the M19 or the FARC or the Bader-Meinhof gang, the Red Army faction. Incidentally, all but the FARC of that group have disappeared. They were all Soviet-inspired, Soviet-supported. It came through the Warsaw Pact or directly from the KGB. But those that didn't disappear were the Palestinian terror groups like Hamas, and those that were being directed by Iran as part of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. We missed the explosion of radical Islam. We didn't see it coming. We quite frankly thought that many of those radical Islamists were our allies in the fight against the Soviets in Afghanistan. And so it was a surprise when, first of all, the embassy goes up in flames. Second of all, the embassy annex. And then we began to focus on where is the support coming from? Mm-hmm. And of course, the support for what eventually becomes Hezbollah, was coming directly from Tehran.
So I'm just curious what you were doing on the day of the attack.
I was a Marine major on the National Security Council staff. I was actually in my office when we were first alerted by European Command that something terrible had happened in Beirut. I was there on an early Sunday morning because we were actually planning the liberation of Grenada. And of course, all that planning stopped to focus on what had transpired in Beirut. We didn't know the magnitude of the catastrophe, did not have a sense, at least an immediate sense, on who had done it. And then immediately our focus became one of rescuing those who were trapped in the rubble and, of course, evacuating those who were killed back through Germany.
So what was the thought process then in the weeks after the bombing? How should we respond to this?
Yeah.
I mean, the way I say that because it seems like we went to Beirut to keep the peace, but there really wasn't any peace to keep.
No, they came in peace. We were peacekeepers, part of an international coalition. As you know from having been out there, the French paratroopers barracks was also bombed literally within minutes. The MO for radical Islamists is to have a major event, a catastrophic event, that, of course, if you can, set off multiple targets at the same time. That's repeated again in 1998 in Tanzania and Nairobi, and of course 9/11/01 here in the United States with 4 aircraft being hijacked simultaneously. It's kind of a pattern. Now, of course, we didn't know any of that then. Mm-hmm. We've all learned accordingly. The end result of Beirut was that the international peacekeeping effort evaporated. Not only we, but the French, the British, everybody pulled out. There were then, of course, a bunch of hijackings and all kinds of additional terror, like the kidnapping of Americans and other Westerners all over Beirut. The lesson that they took from it was you can drive the Americans out by inflicting casualties upon them.
Right. So the lesson that we need to take from that then would be that our response trains or teaches our enemies how to deal with us in the future.
They're brutal, but they're not fools. Okay, they have an agenda. It's called jihad. And what we've got to stop doing is calling it everything but. They're not extremists. It's not just Al-Qaeda. Radical Islam is today franchised out all over the world. You could call yourself one thing in one country and be something else in another country. We were on those operations in the Philippines and saw those organizations. They're not calling themselves Al-Qaeda.
Right.
But they have the same agenda. Their agenda is to dominate the part of the world in which they can control events and to impose Sharia law on the population, which is in some cases predominantly Muslim. Mm-hmm. What we've seen happens in the so-called Arab Spring is a follow-on to all of that. In fact, even though it's very controversial to say so today, what's now happening in Egypt is perhaps the first reversal of radical Islamists that we've seen ever since all of this began back in 1983.
Yeah, so it seems like it's important to really drive that point home, that America needs to remember that whatever our response is to the next terror attack is going to teach our enemies how to deal with us in the future.
And that's why it's a great tribute to you and Dennis for going out there, being on the ground here on the 30th anniversary, coming back and putting this together. And my hope is that what the American people see in this is not simply a reason to hang your heads. It's the resilience of the American spirit. That today, yes, you had 241 Marines killed 30 years ago today. And today, there's thousands of Marines on duty who stood up and volunteered to serve in some of the most difficult and dangerous places on earth, as well as soldiers and sailors and airmen and guardsmen all over the world, defending us from the likes of what they would like to be able to do to us and can't, because those first defenders, those first responders are out there protecting us.
All right, folks, that's all I've got for today. A lot more to come on this story, without a doubt. In the meantime, make sure you like and share the podcast. We're growing pretty rapidly. I'm really happy with that. And go on over to patreon.com/hotzone and subscribe for $3 a month. Buy me a cup of coffee. I can keep this content coming. And the more people we get on board, the more exciting content I can bring you, because I'll be able to afford to go more places. So thanks for watching. Thanks for being a part of it. All right, take care.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.